Hello guys, now we are on the fourth game in the Queenside Pawn Majority series, and this game is played between Eliscasses and Floor in Baden, Semmering Baden, and in 1937, and this is a Grunfeld defense. And let's see the game. We'll see from the black side, and the game goes d4, knight f6, c4, g6, and knight c3, d5. Bishop f4, bishop g7, e3 castles, and knight f3, c5, cd5, and knight takes d5, bishop e5, and knight takes c3, and b takes c3. Now c takes d5, and now after c takes d5, after c takes d5, after c takes d5, uh, knight takes d5, bishop e5, takes c3, b takes c3, c takes d, and now bishop takes g7, and king takes g7, and c takes d4. Now queen a5 check, and queen to d2. Now knight to c6, bishop to e2, and rook to d8. The assessment of this position by theory is that black stands better. Uh, by now you you will have progressed sufficiently to recognize the reason for this conclusion. Black has 2 pawns to 1 on the queen side. However, it requires considerable discernment to realize that this advantage, in spite of white's clear-cut majority in the center, is in fact of importance. Excellent technique is necessary, not indeed to force a win, but even to extract some real winning chances from the situation. An inexperienced player will make a blind rush. Uh, so he pushes forward and forces a pawn through, which becomes isolated and is promptly lost. Let's examine the further course of game. Now queen takes a5. This is more or less compulsory because after castles, if queen takes d2, knight takes d2, then e5 is coming, to which white will lose a pawn. So first queen takes a5, then knight takes a5. Now castles. On the whole, it is unwise to castle the king away from the hostile pawn majority. The king should be at the hand when help is needed to stop a potential enemy passed pawn. Instead of this move, white should have played king to d2, and bringing the h rook to e1. No, not e1, c1. Bring instead of this. I mean, yeah, instead of castling, he could bring the king to d2 and then bring the h rook to c1. So he castled, and then bishop to e6, and then e4. As is understandable, white tries to exploit his pawn majority in the center, but to little effect, as will be seen. Now bishop to g4, an indirect attack on the d pawn. Now rook f d1, e6, in order to isolate a prospective white passed pawn. King to f1, The king, evidently sorry to have castled, decides to start back towards the center. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and rook a c8. An important subsidiary part of black's strategy in such cases, occupying the c file. He threatens in rook c2. Now rook to d2. Now d5 and e5 and d5 by white. And here he should not play rook ad1 because of knight c4, rook to d3, and there will be knight b2. So d5 was correct, and then knight to c4, rook e2, knight to d6, rook b1, knight rook c4, g3, rook d c8, and now bishop g2, rook c1, check, and rook takes c1, rook c1 check, and rook to e1, rook takes e1 check, and king takes e1. Black has made use of the c file to force the exchange of rooks in order to secure a favorable knight versus bishop ending. The treatment of this ending we will be seeing now. The role played here by black's queenside pawn majority was in the main a passive one, as black was in fact chiefly concerned with the aim of making white's central pawn majority harmless. However, it must be considered that black had to thank his queenside pawn majority for the ability to reach his objective. In this type of position, the c file will often fall under black's domination, at least when, as here, the queens are exchanged and the white king fails to reach d2 in good time. It must be added that even before the general exchange which took place, black was in a position to make use of the c file for an attack on white's isolated a pawn. And guys, now the game situation has turned out to be a good knight versus a bad bishop for white. So let us sum up the conclusion derived from this example. Here black has the better game because white has a bad bishop. So what are the principles involved in having a good knight, and how to oppose the bad bishop of the opponent is you must fix the obstructing pawns. So the obstructing pawn here is the e4 pawn. So the e4 pawn must not come out of place. It should be there to obstruct him, so that he will be always a bad bishop. And also sometimes in the end game you should occupy the blockading square with the king. And calculate accurately when to lift the blockade and allow the hostile passed pawn to advance. In such situation, the smallest variation may make all difference between a win and a loss. Sum up the various possibilities of a breakthrough and try to combine these. So now White's pawn at e4 and d5 hinder their own bishop, and the unguarded e-pawn ties the bishop for the time to f3 or g2 or h1. The verdict of this position is black has the better game, but as will be seen, it is not clear that whether a win can be forced against the best play. The plan consists of again of combination of possible continuations like advance of black's queenside pawns, march of the king to c5 and d4, establishing and reinforcing the pressure on e4. So now f5, black loses no time in increasing his pressure on e4. In addition, he need no longer be anxious about white's f4, which might be the reply to the move if played later. At the moment, f4 would be satisfactorily met by king f6. So now f3, a difficult decision for white. If at all e takes f5 and g takes f5, f4 and e4, white controls d4 and has by no means a bad position. Black has a better continuation against here. So after e takes f5 by white, black's better continuation would be knight takes f5, and after king to d2, now king f6, and after king d3, now king to e7, and now if king to e4, then king to d6, if f4, ef4, gf4, and b5, bishop to f1, b4, and bishop to c4, knight to e7, and king to d4, and knight to c8, and bishop to b3, and knight to b6, and followed by a5 and a4. If at all instead of f4, if white plays bishop to f1, this is met by knight e7, bishop to c4, and knight to g8, followed by knight f6, wins a pawn. So all this have come because of king to e4. If at all the king goes to c4, then king to d6, then after a4, there is a6 and a5, knight to e7, and f4, ef4, gf4, and knight to c8, and after bishop to e4, b5 check, a takes b6, and knight takes b6 check, and after king d4, then a5. If at all black plays bishop f1 instead of a4, then knight to e7, then bishop to g2 again, and knight to c8, and and knight b6 wins a pawn here. So e takes f5 is not that good, and after f3, now after fe4, black has obtained one of his target positions, permanent pressure on e4, whereby at least one of the white pieces, king or bishop, is tied to its defense. Now b5, mobilizing the queen side. King d2, a5, king d3, now king f6, bishop f3, king e7, and here h4 by white. And this move leads to a decisive weakening of white's kingside pawns, because he thereby abandons the possibility of keeping the g pawn guarded by a pawn. It will become clear why this factor is of importance. Now here, instead of h4, bishop to d1, king to d8, and a4, this would have been correct. And here, after b takes a4, bishop takes a4, king to c7, and bishop to c2, king to b6, king to c3, defense. So b takes a4 would not be correct. So b4, bishop to b3, king to c7, and bishop to c2, king to b6, and king to c3, king to I'm sorry, no, king after uh, c2, king b6, then again bishop to b3, knight to b7, and king c4, now knight to c5, bishop to c2. It is now essential for white to obtain this position with black to move, or else he will be in a zugzwang. Since white has sufficient moves with his bishop, he can always ensure that this happens. And here black may try h5 and h4 and b3 and b3, the knight takes e4 is coming. Bishops to c2, king, knight here. So this should be equal for both the sides. So here instead of h5, if g5, then g4, then h6, then h3, then knight to b7, now king to d3, knight to d6, and bishop to b3, king to c5, king to c5. This. So I wanted to show you another variation. Instead of knight b7, g5. No. Here after g5, instead of knight b7, if b3, bishop takes it. It's a mistake because of knight takes e4 and bishop d1. So the black pawns are on dark squares, so it cannot be attacked by white. So the knight will dominate the game. So the pawn must not be taken. After this, b3, bishop b1 is correct. And after b2, king to c3, knight takes a4, king b3, knight c5, king takes b2, and king b5, and king to c3 is coming. So let's see this variation. After the king comes to c5, and now black can try to transfer his knight to f4 or deflect white's king with b2 and penetrate with his king towards white's kingside pawns. Neither of these methods leads to a forced win, although white would experience continuing difficulties. So let's see from the last position, I mean from the 34th move. So I just showed you all these variations to be illustrative for you to learn the end game. So here on 34th move, white played h4, and now h6, h6. If at all white plays h5, then black will play g5. Now bishop to d1 and king to d8. Now now a4 by white. White hits on the right plan. He cannot adopt a waiting policy for now. Once the black king reaches the center of the battle, the advance of his queenside pawns will be decisive. So now, if at all b4 can be played, and after b takes a4, in the game b takes a4 was played. Here blacks misses his chance because b4 followed by maneuvering his king to b6 and his knight to c5, he could win in a interesting manner. For example, after bishop to b3, now king to c7, now bishop to d1, now king to b6, now bishop to b3, now knight to b7, king to c4, knight c5, and bishop to c2. Here again white has the option of reaching the position in question with or without the move, as his bishop can at will gain or lose a tempo. We shall now see that black has a win no matter who has the move. Here after bishop c2, now let's go back in position. Now let's go back to b takes a4 and bishop takes a4, king to c7, bishop to c2, king to b6, and king to c3, king to b5. The attack on white's g pawn no longer wins. So now king b3, king to c5, king a4, all this and this, king c5, then bishop d3, then g5, king b2 to take the pawn. After king c5 in the game, now king to a4, now knight to c4. Black makes the last attempt, which still has some chances of success. Now bishop to b3, now knight to d2, and bishop to c2, and knight to f1. If at all g4, then knight to e3 is coming. So black is winning the g pawn. Now king takes a5, knight takes g3, king a4, and knight knight to h5, king to b3, now king d4, and now knight to f6, and here the game may go like this. I think black is winning now. Okay. King d5, g2, and then now g4, and now bishop h1, now king e5, king c4, knight d7, and king c3, bishop f6, king c4, knight d7, king c3, knight c5, king c4, knight a4, bishop to g2, and it's better, bishop takes, not takes. So guys, I hope you would have enjoyed the game. It's a very long game indeed, and I just want to show you the end game, how all the variation involved in the end game in this good knight versus bad bishop. And black needs in this type of Grunfeld positions, black needs to play very accurately to gain an advantage. So thank you all. I'll be meeting you in the next game.